The taxi dispatcher closed the glass. The thick, scratched pane of plexiglass slid shut with a tired, rattling sigh, muffling the cacophony of the garage beyond. He took my trip slip, glanced at the totals without really seeing them, and then, instead of pushing it into the wire basket for accounting, he slid it back under the gap at the bottom of the window. His knuckles, broad and scarred, brushed the worn Formica countertop. He said, "Sit. Keep me company." His voice was just as I knew it from the radio, a low rumble like gravel turning over in a slow cement mixer, but without the crackle of static. It was warmer, deeper. It settled somewhere in my chest and stayed there. I'd been driving the night shift for citywide cabs for 3 years. 3 years of bleary-eyed dawns, of sticky back seats, and the lingering ghosts of cheap perfume and cheaper whiskey. 3 years of watching the city exhale its daytime persona and inhale the neon-soaked, desperate loneliness of the dark. In all that time, my interactions with Leo, the night dispatcher, had been purely functional. He was Unit 1. I was Unit 42. He was the voice that sent me to rain-slicked street corners and desolate bus stations, the disembodied command center of my solitary orbit. I knew the cadence of his calls, the clipped professionalism when things were busy, the slight drag in his syllables when the city finally slept and the calls dwindled to a trickle. I knew he drank his coffee black and that he sometimes hummed, a low, tuneless sound, when he thought no one was on the channel. But I didn't know him. We had never spoken a word to each other that wasn't about a fare or a street closure. And now this. My mind, sluggish from 12 hours behind the wheel, tried to catch up. I blinked, my gaze dropping from his face to the slip of paper lying between us. My handwriting, a tired scrawl, detailed the night's earnings. It felt like an offering I'd made that he was now refusing. I should get home. I managed, the words feeling thick and clumsy in my mouth. My apartment was waiting, with its single unwashed coffee mug in the sink and the perpetual gloom that even the morning sun couldn't quite dispel. It wasn't a home. It was a holding cell between shifts. Leo didn't look at me. His attention was on the bank of monitors in front of him, screens showing GPS dots of the other night crawlers, the few cars still out hunting for the last of the late-night fares. His eyes, which I could now see were a deep, tired brown, scanned the map. He wore a faded, dark gray Henley, the sleeves pushed up to his elbows, revealing thick forearms dusted with dark hair. There was a small, silvery scar that cut through his left eyebrow, a detail the radio could never convey. It made him look permanently thoughtful, or maybe just permanently weary. "Just for a bit," he said, his voice still that low, even rumble. He finally turned his head, and his eyes met mine through the glass. It was the first time we'd ever really made eye contact. "The coffee's still hot. Or what passes for it?" He gestured with his chin toward a battered metal door to the side of the dispatch window, the door that led into his cage. It had a small, square window of its own, reinforced with wire mesh. I had never seen it open. My heart gave a strange, unfamiliar lurch. It wasn't a flutter. It was a solid, heavy thump, like a book falling off a shelf in an empty room. Every instinct, honed by years of keeping my head down and my life uncomplicated, screamed at me to just nod, take my slip, and walk away. Go home. Go to sleep. Repeat. It was the safe, known rhythm of my life. But I was so tired of being safe. I was tired of the silence of my apartment, of the solitary hum of my refrigerator, of the feeling that I was just a ghost haunting the driver's seat of a numbered car. So I nodded. A click echoed in the quiet garage as he buzzed the lock. I pushed the heavy door open and stepped inside. The air in the dispatch office was thick with the scent of old paper, ozone from the electronics, and the bitter, scorched aroma of hours-old coffee. It was cramped, a shoebox cluttered with maps, binders, and the detritus of 1,000 lonely nights. A single bare bulb overhead cast a harsh, yellow light on everything. It was nothing like I'd imagined, and yet it was exactly right. It felt like the source of the voice, a place built of necessity and long hours. Leo was swiveling in his worn office chair, which squeaked in protest. He pointed to a rickety-looking stool tucked into a corner. "Have a seat, 42, he said. The corner of his mouth twitched, the barest hint of a smile. "Or Julian. Whichever you prefer." He knew my name. Of course he knew my name. It was on my file, on the top of the slip he was still holding. But hearing him say it felt different. It made me feel solid. Real. Not just a number blinking on his screen. Julian is fine, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I perched on the edge of the stool, feeling oversized and awkward in the small space. My knees were practically touching his desk. I could see the fine lines around his eyes, the dark stubble that shadowed his jaw. He was older than I'd thought. Maybe 40. Maybe a bit more. He looked like a man who had seen a lot of sunrises from the wrong side of the window. He poured a thick, dark liquid from a stained carafe into a chipped ceramic mug that said "World's Okayest Dispatcher" and pushed it across the desk toward me. Our fingers brushed as I took it. His skin was warm and calloused. The contact was brief, accidental, meaningless. My pulse hammered in my throat. I wrapped my hands around the mug, letting the heat seep into my cold fingers. We sat in silence for a moment. The only sounds the low hum of the computer tower and the occasional, staticky squawk from the main speaker. A driver, Unit 18, was calling in his final fare. Leo answered without taking his eyes off me, his voice slipping back into the familiar, professional cadence. Roger that, 18. Sign off when you're clear. Unit 1. Over, he clicked the microphone off. The silence returned, thicker this time, charged with something I couldn't name. I took a sip of the coffee. It was terrible, bitter and strong enough to dissolve steel. I loved it. Long night, he asked. They're all long nights, I answered, and was surprised by the honesty in my own voice. He gave a short, quiet huff of a laugh. It wasn't a sound of amusement, but of recognition. Yeah, they are, and that's how it started. I didn't go home. I sat on that wobbly stool in the cramped, stuffy office, and I kept him company. We didn't talk much at first. He worked, his focus on the rhythmic dance of calls and dispatches. I just sat and watched and listened. I watched the way his broad shoulders moved under his shirt as he reached for the microphone. I watched his fingers, blunt and capable, as they tapped on the keyboard. I listened to the steady, calm rhythm of his breathing in the quiet moments between calls. It became a routine. Every morning, at the end of my shift, I'd turn in my slip and he would buzz me in. I'd take my seat on the stool. He'd pour me a mug of god-awful coffee, and we would inhabit the pre-dawn silence together. Sometimes we talked. He'd ask about a difficult fare. I'd ask about a new driver. The conversations were sparse, islands in an ocean of quiet companionship. But they were more than I had with anyone else. I started to learn him in small, sensory details. The scent of his soap, a clean, sharp smell like Irish Spring that clung to his shirt. The way he would rub the back of his neck when he was tired, his palm rough against the skin. The low, rumbling hum that would start in his chest when a slow, old song played on the small radio he kept on a shelf. I was an observer by nature. It's what made me a decent cabbie. I noticed things. But with Leo, my observation became acute, focused, a desperate kind of study. I was mapping a new territory, a world contained in that 10 by 10 foot room. I analyzed every gesture, every word. When he passed me the mug, did his fingers linger against mine for a fraction of a second longer than necessary? When he leaned over to point at something on a map, was the warmth I felt from his arm brushing mine just a consequence of proximity, or was it something else? My mind became a frantic engine of interpretation, searching for meaning in the mundane. It was exhausting. It was exhilarating. One morning, about a month into our strange new ritual, it was raining. Not a gentle spring shower, but a relentless, driving downpour that had been lashing the city for hours. The streets were slick and treacherous, the fares were few, and the ones I did get were miserable, dripping messes who smelled of wet wool and frustration. I was soaked through by the time I got back to the depot, my mood as gray and heavy as the sky. When I stepped into the dispatch office, shaking water from my jacket, Leo was standing, stretching his back. He turned, and for a second, his professional mask dropped. I saw a flicker of genuine concern in his eyes. "You look half drowned," he said. "Feel it." I grumbled, running a hand through my wet hair. He reached behind his chair and pulled a towel from a hook. It was old and faded, but it was clean. He tossed it to me. "Here." I caught it, surprised. I rubbed my hair and face, the rough cotton a welcome friction against my cold skin. The towel smelled faintly of him. That clean soap scent mixed with something else, something uniquely Leo. I held it to my face for a second too long, breathing it in. When I lowered it, he was watching me, his expression unreadable. That steady, quiet gaze that seemed to see right through me. My cheeks grew warm. I felt exposed, as if he'd just read the last 6 weeks of my internal monologue. "Thanks," I mumbled, folding the towel and setting it on a corner of the desk. "Don't mention it," he said, turning back to his console. But the air had changed. The space between us, usually filled with a comfortable silence, was now tight with a new kind of tension. It was a thin, high-strung wire, and I felt that if either of us moved too quickly, it would snap. I sat on my stool, nursing my coffee, my mind racing. The simple act of him giving me a towel felt monumental. It was an act of care, of notice. He saw that I was cold and wet, and he did something about it. In my solitary life, such small kindnesses were foreign. I didn't know how to receive them. I didn't know what they meant. I found myself replaying the moment his fingers had brushed mine when he gave me the coffee mug. It was nothing, a ghost of a touch, but my skin still remembered it. It was a focal point, a tiny spark in the vast, gray landscape of my existence. I would zoom in on these moments, dissect them, turn them over and over in my mind until they lost all shape and meaning, and then I would start again. He was leaning forward, his forearm resting on the desk near my knee. We were so close. If I shifted my weight just a little, my leg would press against his. The thought sent a jolt of pure, terrifying electricity through me. I stayed perfectly still, my muscles locked, my breath held tight in my chest. I am in a tiny room with a man I barely know, and I am forgetting how to breathe. This is what my life has become. A series of tiny, nerve-wracking moments, all centered around a man who probably just wanted someone to talk to so he wouldn't fall asleep during the graveyard shift. My internal sarcasm kicked in, a familiar defense mechanism. Get a grip, Julian. He's just being nice. Not everyone who is kind to you wants to what? What do you even want? I didn't have an answer. The yearning inside me was a vague, shapeless thing. It wasn't just physical. It was a desire to be seen. And Leo, with his quiet, steady gaze, saw me. I was sure of it. A few weeks later, the city was hit with a freak summer storm. The kind that boils up out of nowhere, with violent winds and lightning that splits the sky. It wasn't just rain, it was chaos. Power lines went down. Traffic lights blinked out. The streets turned into rivers. The radio, which was usually quiet by 4 in the morning, exploded into a frenzy of panicked calls. Unit 1, this is 27. I've got a fare trying to get to the hospital, but Chestnut is flooded out. What's my alternate? Unit 1, 14 here. A tree just came down on Elm. The whole road is blocked. Unit 1, this is 33. My engine stalled out in the water on 5th. I'm stuck. I had just pulled into the depot, my own shift and nightmare of hydroplaning and near misses. I was about to hand in my slip and retreat to my apartment when I heard the chaos erupting from the dispatch office. I pushed the door open without waiting to be buzzed in. Leo was in motion, a study of focused intensity. He had a phone pressed to one ear, his other hand flying across the keyboard, rerouting drivers, coordinating with emergency services, his voice never rising, never betraying the pressure. It was a low, calming anchor in the storm of panicked voices. 27, try routing through Grand, but be advised, reports of high water there too. Proceed with caution. 14, stay put. I'm marking you off duty until it's clear. 33, what's your exact location? I'll get a tow on the line. He saw me standing in the doorway, rain dripping from my hair onto the linoleum floor. He didn't have time to greet me. He just jerked his head toward a secondary phone on the desk that was ringing incessantly. Get that? Just take messages. Names and numbers. I'll call them back. I didn't even think. I lunged for the phone, grabbing a pen and a notepad. Citywide cabs, I said, my own voice sounding strange and distant. For the next 2 hours, we worked. He commanded the fleet, his voice a steady lifeline through the radio. I fielded the calls from the public, a deluge of frantic people trying to get home, trying to get to work, trying to escape the storm. I scribbled down addresses, relayed messages, and made pot after pot of that terrible, life-saving coffee. We didn't speak to each other directly. We didn't need to. We moved around the tiny office in a seamless, unspoken rhythm. When he needed a map, I had it ready. When his pen ran out of ink, I slapped another one into his hand. When the main radio squawked, I fell silent, listening, anticipating what he would need next. We were a team. More than that, we were a single unit, a two-headed, four-armed creature battling the chaos of the city. As the sun began to rise, the storm broke. The rain softened to a drizzle, the wind died down, and the calls slowed to a trickle. The last stranded driver was picked up. The last panicked fare was delivered home. A weary quiet settled over the office, broken only by the drip of water from the ceiling into a bucket in the corner. I was slumped on my stool, utterly exhausted, my notepad filled with a chaotic scrawl of names and numbers. Leo leaned back in his chair, the squeak loud in the silence. He ran a hand over his face, his palm rasping against his stubble. For the first time, he looked his age. He looked tired down to the bone. He turned his head and looked at me. His eyes were soft, the weariness in them mixed with something else. Gratitude. Maybe even surprise. "Couldn't have done that without you," he said, his voice low and rough with fatigue. "Just answered the phone," I said, shrugging, trying to downplay the fierce pride that swelled in my chest. "No," he said, his gaze steady. "You were here," the way he said it. "You were here." It wasn't just about my physical presence in the room. It was more than that. He was acknowledging me, seeing my contribution, seeing me. It was a moment of unexpected vulnerability, a crack in his stoic armor. He had needed help, and I had been there to give it. He pushed himself out of his chair and walked over to the small, grimy window that looked out over the garage. The dawn was breaking, painting the low-hanging clouds in shades of bruised purple and soft gray. The world was washed clean. "Why do you do it, Julian?" he asked, his back still to me. "Drive nights. It's a hell of a way to live." The question was quiet, personal. It wasn't small talk. It was a genuine inquiry. He was giving me an opening, a chance to share something real. My throat felt tight. I had a dozen glib answers I could give. The money's better. The traffic's lighter. I'm a night owl. But looking at his broad back, the stillness of his posture as he watched the sunrise, I felt the need to offer him a piece of the truth. "I like the quiet," I said, my voice barely audible. "And I'm not very good with people. In the daytime. In the cab. At night, there are rules. A destination. A fare. It's simple. I know what's expected of me." It was the most I had ever admitted to anyone about my own isolation. The words hung in the air between us, fragile and exposed. Leo was silent for a long time. I thought maybe I had said too much, that I had broken the unspoken rules of our strange companionship. I started to gather my things, ready to retreat back into my own world. Then he spoke, his voice so quiet I almost missed it. "I get that." He turned from the window. The new morning light caught the silver in his hair and the deep lines etched around his eyes. He looked at me, and for the first time, his expression was completely open. The guard was down. I saw a loneliness in him that mirrored my own. A profound, bone-deep weariness with the world that I recognized instantly. In that moment, the tension that had been humming between us for months solidified into something else. It was no longer just my one-sided obsession, my frantic internal analysis. It was a shared current, a low-voltage hum that passed between the two of us. He felt it too. I knew it, as surely as I knew my own name. The next few nights were different. The comfortable silence between us was gone, replaced by a palpable, charged awareness. Every accidental touch felt deliberate. Every shared glance held a question. We were circling each other, two planets caught in a gravitational pull, getting closer and closer to a collision I wasn't sure either of us knew how to survive. The tipping point came on a Tuesday. Tuesdays were always quiet. I was on the tail end of my shift, cruising through a deserted industrial park, when a call came in. The pickup was a bar downtown, one of those places that catered to a rough crowd. I should have been wary, but the night had been slow and I needed the fare. The guy who climbed into my back seat was huge, drunk, and angry at the world. He slurred a destination on the other side of town and then started muttering to himself. I kept my eyes on the road, my hands tight on the wheel, my radio on but silent. Then his muttering turned to me. He started with the usual complaints about the route, the fare, the car. Then it got personal. "What's a guy like you doing driving a cab?" he slurred, his voice oozing with a cheap, aggressive masculinity. "You look like one of them, you know. One of them artsy boys." A little soft, I didn't respond. I just kept driving. My training kicked in. De-escalate, don't engage, get the fare to the destination and get them out of the car. He wasn't done. He leaned forward, his beery breath hot on my neck. "You one of them faggots?" The word hit me like a punch to the gut. It was a word I hadn't heard directed at me in years, not since high school. It was ugly, brutal, and it stripped away all my carefully constructed defenses. I felt a cold dread wash over me. I keyed the mic, my thumb shaking slightly. My voice was calm, professional, a mask of control. Unit 42 to Unit 1. En route to destination with fare. All clear. It was a coded message. It meant I was okay, but I wanted him to be aware of the situation. I wanted him to hear. Leo's voice came back instantly, clipped and hard. Roger, 42. Unit 1 copies. The fare laughed, a wet, ugly sound. You calling your boyfriend? Tell him I said hi. He spent the rest of the ride spewing a steady stream of vile, homophobic garbage. I just drove. I focused on the white lines on the road, on the rhythm of the windshield wipers, on the sound of Leo's silent presence over the radio. He didn't say anything else, but I knew he was listening. I could feel his attention like a physical weight, a shield between me and the ugliness in my back seat. When I finally pulled up to the destination, a rundown apartment block, the guy tossed a crumpled bill onto the front seat and stumbled out of the car, still muttering insults. I waited until he was inside the building, then I pulled away from the curb and drove a few blocks before I stopped. I put the car in park and just sat there, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. I felt contaminated, violated. The sterile, safe space of my cab had been invaded. My radio crackled. 42, what's your 20? Leo's voice was low, tight. I'm on Parker Street, I managed to say. End your shift. Come back to the depot. Now it wasn't a suggestion. It was an order. When I walked into the dispatch office 10 minutes later, he was standing, his arms crossed over his chest. His face was a thundercloud. The protective anger I saw in his eyes was so intense it almost took my breath away. He didn't look at me with pity. He looked at me with a cold, hard fury that was entirely on my behalf. Are you okay? He asked, his voice a low growl. I just nodded, unable to speak. The delayed reaction was hitting me, a wave of nausea and shame. He didn't press me. He just walked over, took my keys from my numb fingers, and pointed to the stool. Sit, I sat. He made coffee, his movements sharp and jerky. He slammed the mug down on the desk in front of me, coffee sloshing over the side. He didn't apologize. He was vibrating with a rage that he was struggling to contain. It was the most terrifying and the most comforting thing I had ever seen. No one had ever been angry for me before. We sat in a thick, heavy silence for a long time. The anger slowly drained out of him, replaced by a tense quiet. He was still standing, leaning against the far wall, watching me. You don't have to take that shit, he said finally, his voice raw. You hear me, Julian? You get a fare like that again, you find the nearest police station and you kick them out. To hell with the fare, it's part of the job, I said weakly. No, he snapped, his voice sharp. It's not. He pushed off the wall and walked over to the desk. He stood in front of me, so close I had to crane my neck to look up at him. He was close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body. He smelled of coffee and righteous anger. People ever give you trouble? He asked, his voice dropping to a low, intense whisper. Outside of the cab, I thought about the careful, quiet life I had built for myself. The way I avoided eye contact, the way I made myself small, the way I never, ever let anyone get close enough to see the real me. The me that fare had seen and hated instantly. I don't give them a chance, I said, my voice hoarse. His jaw tightened. He looked down at my hands, which were still trembling slightly as I clutched the coffee mug. He reached out, slowly, deliberately, and placed his hand over mine. His palm was wide and warm, and it covered my knuckles completely. It wasn't a fleeting, accidental touch. It was a conscious, deliberate act. A statement. It was grounding. The trembling stopped. My breath hitched. I stared at his hand on mine. The calluses, the short, clean nails, the dusting of dark hair on his wrist. It was a strong hand. A capable hand. A hand that was currently holding mine with a gentle, firm pressure that sent a shockwave straight to my core. This is it. This is the moment the wire snaps. He didn't move. He just stood there, his hand covering mine, his eyes boring into me. The air in the room was so thick I could barely draw it into my lungs. Every nerve ending in my body was on fire. The subtext of the last few months, the unspoken questions, the lingering touches, all of it coalesced into this single, silent gesture. I could pull my hand away. I could laugh it off, make a joke, break the spell. I could retreat back to the safety of ambiguity. Or I could answer. Slowly, my heart pounding a frantic, desperate rhythm against my ribs, I turned my hand over. I uncurled my fingers from the mug and laced them through his. A tremor went through his hand. His breath hitched, a mirror of my own. His eyes widened slightly, the dark brown irises searching mine for any sign of hesitation, of regret. He found none. There was only a terrifying, exhilarating certainty. The silence stretched, taut and fragile. He had asked a question without words, and I had answered. The next move was his. He swallowed, his throat working. He let go of my hand and took a half step back. My heart plummeted. Mistake. It was a mistake. I misread everything. The familiar cold dread began to creep back in. I had overstepped. I had ruined the one good thing in my empty life. But then he reached up and cupped my jaw, his thumb stroking gently over the line of my cheek. His touch was hesitant, almost reverent. It wasn't a gesture of aggression or possession. It was a question. Julian, he whispered, and my name on his lips was a prayer. And then he leaned down. He was slow, giving me every opportunity to pull away. I didn't. I leaned up, meeting him halfway. His lips were chapped, firm, and they tasted faintly of bitter coffee. The kiss wasn't soft or romantic. It was raw, a desperate collision of loneliness and longing. It was the release of months of unspoken tension, of watchful nights and silent companionship. It was a confirmation. It was an answer. His other hand came up to tangle in my hair, holding me to him as the kiss deepened. It wasn't rushed. It was a slow, thorough exploration, a conversation without words. It was everything I had been too afraid to even dream of. In the harsh yellow light of the grimy dispatch office, surrounded by the ghosts of 1,000 frantic calls, I felt like I had finally come home. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless. He rested his forehead against mine, his eyes closed. I could feel the slight tremble in his hands, which were now framing my face. I was shaking too. I started, but I had no idea what to say. What do you say after a kiss that rearranges your entire world? Shoo, he murmured, his voice thick. It's okay, he didn't move away. He just stayed there, his forehead pressed to mine, his thumbs stroking my temples, our breaths mingling in the small space between us. For the first time in years, maybe ever, I didn't feel alone. The first rays of dawn were beginning to filter through the grimy window, casting long, dusty shadows across the floor. The shift was over. The city was waking up. A new day was starting, and with it, a terrifying, wonderful uncertainty. The kiss hung in the air, a beautiful, fragile thing. The transition from the charged intimacy of the night to the stark reality of morning was jarring. The day shift dispatcher, a cheerful, bustling woman named Maria, would be arriving any minute. The bubble we had created around ourselves was about to burst. Leo seemed to sense it too. He straightened up, putting a few inches of space between us, though he didn't let go of me completely. His hands slid from my face to my shoulders, his grip still firm and grounding. A flicker of something, anxiety, uncertainty, crossed his face. I should go, I said, the words feeling like a betrayal. I didn't want to go. I wanted to stay in this room, in this moment, forever. Yeah, he said, his voice flat. He dropped his hands and took a step back, turning to busy himself with tidying the desk, stacking papers that didn't need stacking. The connection was broken. The air filled with a sudden, painful awkwardness. Did he regret it? The thought screamed through my mind. Was it just a moment of comfort, a reaction to the adrenaline of the night? My own insecurities came rushing back in, a familiar, toxic tide. I was a fool. I had read everything wrong. I grabbed my jacket, my movements clumsy. Well, see you tomorrow, I mumbled to his back, already halfway out the door. He didn't turn around. Yeah, see ya, Julian, I fled. I didn't just walk out of the depot. I practically ran. I got into my own car, not the cab, and drove home in a daze. The kiss replayed in my mind on a loop, a Technicolor movie against the gray backdrop of the morning. One moment, it was a source of soaring, unbelievable joy. The next, it was a monument to my own foolishness. My apartment felt colder and emptier than ever before. I paced the small living room, my mind a chaotic whirlwind. I had crossed a line. We had crossed a line. And I had no idea what was on the other side. The fear of rejection was a physical thing, a cold knot in my stomach. I was so convinced I had ruined everything that I seriously considered quitting. I could just disappear, go back to being a ghost. It would be easier, safer. I didn't go back to the depot the next night. I called in sick, something I had never done before. I claimed a stomach bug, my voice strained and unconvincing even to my own ears. I spent the night on my couch, staring at the ceiling, feeling the silence of my apartment press in on me. The loneliness I had grown so accustomed to was no longer a dull, background ache. It was a sharp, stabbing pain. It was the absence of him. The following day was even worse. The anxiety was suffocating. I knew I couldn't avoid him forever. I had to go back to work. I had to face him. I spent the entire day bracing myself for the inevitable "we need to talk" conversation, the gentle letdown, the awkward retreat back into our separate corners. When I walked into the depot that evening to start my shift, my heart was a trip hammer against my ribs. I avoided the dispatch window, grabbing my keys and paperwork from the main counter and heading straight for my cab. I couldn't bring myself to look at the little office, to see if he was in there, watching me. The first few hours of the shift were torture. Every time the radio crackled to life, I flinched, expecting to hear his voice summoning me back to the depot for the firing squad. But the calls were all for other drivers. It was a busy night, and I was grateful for the distraction of the traffic, the fares, the familiar rhythm of the job. Around 3 in the morning, during a rare lull, the radio crackled again. This time, it was for me. Unit 1 to Unit 42, my blood ran cold. This was it. 42 here. I answered, my voice tight. There was a pause. I could hear the faint hum of the electronics in his office. Then his voice, low and steady. You're near a coffee shop on Grand, right? The 24-hour 1-inch. Roger that. Unit 1. I am good. Swing by. I need a coffee. Another pause. The way I like it, my mind went blank. He was ordering coffee? It was so mundane, so normal, it completely threw me off balance. Then the last part hit me. The way I like it. He knew that I knew how he took his coffee. He was reminding me of our shared history, of the countless mornings I had watched him drink it. It wasn't a rejection. It was an invitation. A test. Roger, Unit 1. I said, a wave of dizzying relief washing over me. On my way, I bought the coffee, my hands shaking so badly I almost spilled it. When I got back to the depot, I took a deep breath and walked to the dispatch window. He was there, his back to me, talking on the radio. I slid the coffee through the opening at the bottom of the plexiglass. He finished his call and turned around. He looked at the coffee, then he looked at me. The exhaustion was still there in his eyes, but the hard, angry lines from the other night were gone. He looked uncertain as I felt. He took a sip of the coffee. Good, he said quietly. You remembered hard to forget, I said, my attempt at a joke falling flat in the tense air. He buzzed the door lock. It was a command. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The office was the same. The stool was in its corner. Nothing had changed, and yet everything was different. I stood awkwardly by the door, not knowing what to do or say. He didn't sit down. He leaned against the edge of his desk, cradling the coffee cup in his hands, and just looked at me. I thought you quit, he said, his voice low. I thought about it, I admitted. Why? I thought I made a mistake. That you regretted it. He let out a short, harsh breath. A mistake? Julian, the only mistake was me letting you walk out that door. And you not coming back yesterday. He took a step toward me, his eyes intense. I spent the last 24 hours thinking I'd scared you off for good. The relief was so profound it made me weak in the knees. You didn't scare me, I whispered. I scared myself, yeah, he said, a small, sad smile touching his lips. Me too. He closed the remaining distance between us. He didn't kiss me this time. He just reached out and took my hand, his fingers lacing through mine. He held our joined hands up between us, studying them as if they were a strange and fascinating object. I'm not good at this, he said, his gaze still on our hands. Talking. All this stuff, me neither, I said. But I am good at this, he said, and he squeezed my hand gently. A simple, deliberate touch. A quiet reassurance that was louder than any grand declaration. I missed my company, that was all it took. 2 days of agonizing fear and anxiety, washed away by a simple cup of coffee and 3 quiet words. I missed you. We stood there for a long moment, hands clasped, in the silent hum of the office. The awkwardness was gone, replaced by a fragile, tentative peace. The next few weeks were a time of quiet navigation. We were learning a new dance, a new rhythm. The end-of-shift coffee continued, but now it was different. The charged tension was replaced by a comfortable intimacy. He would keep his hand on my knee as he worked the console. I would lean my head against his shoulder when exhaustion claimed me. The touches were no longer ambiguous. They were a new language we were learning together. We started talking, really talking. He told me about his ex-wife, a brief, unhappy marriage years ago. He told me about the army, about the restlessness that had kept him moving from town to town until he landed here. I told him about my quiet, lonely childhood, about my passion for photography that I had long since abandoned, about the fear that had kept me locked inside myself for so long. We didn't go on dates. We didn't go to movies or restaurants. Our world was the 10x10 dispatch office and the cab of my taxi. One night, he asked me to take him on a tour of my city, the one I only saw at night. I drove him through the sleeping suburbs, the deserted downtown streets, the industrial parks that looked like sleeping metal giants under the moonlight. I showed him my favorite spots, a scenic overlook where you could see the whole city glittering like a fallen constellation, a quiet park by the river where the only sound was the water lapping against the shore. He didn't say much. He just watched and listened and held my hand. In the intimate darkness of the cab, it felt like we were the only two people in the world. Of course, our little bubble couldn't last forever. The depot was a small world, and people noticed things. They noticed me spending every morning in the dispatch office. They noticed the way Leo's voice softened slightly when he spoke to me over the radio. There were whispers, sideways glances. One of the other drivers, a bitter old-timer named Sal, made a snide comment one day as I was leaving the office. Getting some special treatment from the boss, 42, he sneered, his eyes filled with a petty, ugly malice. I felt the old shame and fear rise up in me. My first instinct was to deny it, to retreat, to make myself small. But then I felt Leo's presence behind me. He had stepped out of the office and was standing right behind my shoulder. He didn't say a word to Sal. He just looked at him. That cold, steady gaze. Sal's smirk faltered. He mumbled something and shuffled away. Leo put a hand on the small of my back. "Don't listen to him," he said, his voice a low rumble meant only for me. "He's just background noise." It was a test, and with Leo's quiet strength behind me, I had passed it. I didn't care what Sal or anyone else thought. What we had was real, and it was more important than the whispers of unhappy men. One morning, after a particularly long and grueling shift, I was more tired than I had ever been. I was slumped on the stool, my head spinning with exhaustion. I must have dozed off, because the next thing I knew, Leo was gently shaking my shoulder. "Hey," he said softly. "Time for the sun to come up." I blinked, disoriented. "Sorry," I mumbled. "I'm just wiped." He studied my face for a moment. "You can't drive home like this." "I'll be fine. Just need some coffee." "No," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a single key on a plain silver ring. He pressed it into my palm and closed my fingers around it. "What's this?" I asked, staring at the key. "It's my place," he said simply. "It's closer. Go sleep. There's coffee in the cupboard, and the couch is comfortable." I looked from the key to his face. This was more than just an offer of a place to crash. A key was a symbol. It was trust. It was an invitation into his life, beyond the walls of the dispatch office. It was a conscious choice, a step into a future I hadn't let myself imagine. "Leo," I started, my throat thick with emotion. "Just go, Julian," he said, his voice soft. "Get some rest." I took the key. His apartment was on the third floor of a plain brick building a few blocks from the depot. It was small, neat, and spare. It smelled like him. There was a worn but comfortable-looking couch in the living room, a small kitchen with a single mug sitting by the sink, and a bookshelf filled with worn paperbacks. It was the apartment of a man who didn't own much, but what he did own, he took care of. It was a quiet, peaceful space. I didn't sleep on the couch. I walked into the bedroom. He was already there, asleep on his back on top of the covers, still in his clothes from the night before. He must have come straight home after his shift ended. The morning light filtered through the blinds, striping the bed in pale yellow lines. His face was relaxed in sleep, the weary lines smoothed away. He looked younger, peaceful. My heart ached with a feeling so intense it was almost painful. It was a mix of love and tenderness, and a profound sense of having found something I hadn't even known I was searching for. I didn't wake him. I found a blanket in the closet and gently draped it over him. Then I pulled a chair from the corner of the room, sat down, and just watched him sleep as the sun climbed higher in the sky. I thought about my journey, about the lonely, ghost-like man who had stumbled into that dispatch office months ago, just looking for a moment of human connection. I thought about the fear, the yearning, the slow, terrifying process of letting someone in. And I looked at Leo, this quiet, steady man who had seen me, really seen me, and had not turned away. He had ordered me to stay. He had kept me company. And in doing so, he had saved me from a life of silence. He stirred in his sleep, his hand reaching out as if searching for something. Without thinking, I reached out and took it. His fingers curled around mine, his grip sure and strong even in sleep. I was no longer just an observer, watching the city from behind a pane of glass. I was here, in this room, holding his hand. The future was still an unwritten map, full of unknown roads and potential wrong turns. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of getting lost. Because I wasn't navigating it alone. I felt a quiet, simple, profound sense of peace settle over me. It was the feeling of having, at long last, found my way home.